right, back now to Bob Lazar and Gene Huff, and the story continues. Here we are at Area S4 south of Groom Lake, and I guess by now you're in great anticipation, Bob, wondering what you're going to be doing.
I was just about to make a point before we broke, and I can't remember it.
Well, that's why you have Gene Huff. Gene?
Gene doesn't remember either.
Gene doesn't remember either.
Well, I think my short-term memory.
He was talking right before we broke about it. He had no idea why they chose him of all the people in the world. But that's
well, actually, Gene, you had said, "Why don't you tell him, Bob, why they chose you?" And Bob said, "I have no idea." And we were talking about the work he did at Los Alamos.
Right. Yeah, he was. I was implying something else. In other words, I was telling him, reminding him of why there were vacancies, why they needed to hire someone, why someone wasn't in his slot already.
And we were talking about the fact that he was not the first one necessarily.
Right.
And that makes sense. In other words, if they had something they didn't understand, I can imagine they would bring in an array of people of different disciplines to take a look-see.
Well, that might have been the case, but to this day I can't figure out why. If certainly you look at my record and the way I approached things and the work I had done before was a little more renegade, and maybe that's what they were doing. Was looking for someone that would approach a project from a different road. And
are you able to talk about what you did at Los Alamos?
I did several things. Initially, I was working on the polarized proton target on the accelerator. The accelerator there at Los Alamos is a linear accelerator. It stretches about, if I remember, about a half mile, and it's one of the more unique setups in that instead of running a single experiment on the output of the accelerator, the beam is split into different areas. And all these different areas are, I don't know really if they're leased or rented to other countries or other scientists, but several other people and other groups from all over the world essentially can conduct experiments simultaneously. At different times, they'll fire different particles down the target for different lengths of time, and everyone can run their own experiments and see what's going on. There was also some Star Wars development done there.
Okay. I'm sitting here listening, trying to imagine any application for what you were about to do, and you don't. At
S4.
Yeah.
There's none. There was no direct connection at all. This is one of the things that has perplexed me forever.
But how could there be?
Maybe this was the point that I was going to make. In fact, it is. It just popped back in my mind. What was strange about the interviews I had was, certainly there was some technical questions here and there. They essentially knew my background already, but what they were most concerned was what I had done in my spare time, which I found to be very unusual.
Now, what had you done in your spare time? You had worked with propulsion systems in your spare time, right?
Right. I mean, they were essentially concerned with more of my, for lack of a better word, playtime than they were with what I was or what I had currently done.
All right. Well, let's take this back to Edward Teller. When you had a conversation with Edward Teller, did you talk about your playtime? Did you talk about...
Well, I was talking about at that time the static ramjet engine that was, in fact, that was in the front of the paper. So we were talking about, in fact, at that time I had filed patents on it, of how the device operated without the need for fuel pumps and things of that sort because of the type of fuel it used.
What is a static ramjet engine?
It was an offshoot of a pressure jet engine, which was invented by Eugene Gluharf, who was also coincidentally the inventor of the rocket ejection seat that's used on all fighter aircraft.
Indeed.
He developed that, I believe, in the 50s, and in the 70s I had run into him, and really, as a kid back then, started working in my spare time as I went to Pierce College at that time, working to improve on the design. I came off with an offshoot of the design, which was a little more complicated, but produced a lot more thrust. The basic design of the engine is it has no moving parts at all. One property of propane is that it sticks to hot metal. Mm-hmm. This eliminates all the needs for flame holders and things of that sort inside the engine, which makes it more complicated. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think of a couple other points about it. But it was a pretty different design as far as jet engines go. And with the changes I made, it was essentially a different type of engine. And after I had gone past the development of it on a test stand, I built a slightly larger one and installed it in the back of a car. And it was a convenient mobile test setup, as opposed, well, and additionally, it was something kind of interesting to play around with in the desert.
Sure.
Which is where the whole article came from in the newspaper. But
all right, well, then I think you've answered your own question.
But someone playing around with jet engines really doesn't qualify him or her to work on something of extraterrestrial origin.
No, but then again, who does have qualifications to go work on something?
Well, there's a point.
So I can understand, and here's how I would, based on what you said, I'll bet here's what happened. The article in the paper, the conversation with Edward Teller, and probably his suggestion, which probably amounts to more of an order, that you'd be a good person, kind of a rebel, to go take a look at the stuff they had at Area S4. That would be my best guess. That's a pretty good guess. What do you think, Gene?
I agree. I think that Edward Teller's word carried all of the weight in the world, and I also agree with you that who would have a background, who would be qualified to work on, a gravity propulsion system and an antimatter reactor and the things Bob later ran into. And Bob's a comprehensive problem solver, has a background in physics and electronics and in propulsion, and I can understand why they'd hire him.
Well, yeah, if you're going to go, if you really have extraterrestrial craft and you're trying to figure out what makes them go, then you're going to go find somebody who works out of the box. In other words, is a bit of a rebel and kind of works out of the normal box and experiments and tinkers and is interested in propulsion. That's the kind of person you're going to go for, because there's nobody out there with specific qualifications for that job.
Yeah, obviously.
In addition to probably other considerations of a psychological profile and,
Yeah, that they were also very concerned with.
Your psychological profile?
Yeah, they were concerned with how I handle stress. In fact, I remember one of the questions was, have you ever thrown tools around in the lab or anything to that effect? And I thought these were very strange questions for what we were talking about. But in either case, I got the job and wound up there. But
haven't you ever thrown tools?